I've started it in pure cinematic narrative form. No intros, straight into the crisis. Immersive and emotional, just like your prompt demands. This is Act 1, and we can build Acts 2 to 4 after this to reach the full length and arc you want. The rain in Lourdes had been falling for days, a cold, relentless curtain that blurred the basilica's spires into the gray sky. Pilgrims still came, shuffling under umbrellas, their faces pale from travel and illness. The air smelled of wet stone, incense, and damp wool inside the Rosary Basilica. Candles sputtered in the draught, their flames bowing as though in prayer. Bishop Andre Beaumont stood at the altar, his hands steady, but his heart anything but. His mind was not in the Mass. It was tangled in letters from Rome, in rumors of division within his diocese, in his own gnawing doubt. He had seen faith heal others, but lately he feared it had abandoned him. At the back of the church, leaning against a pillar, stood Henry Valois, a former soldier, broad-shouldered and unshaven, his eyes sharp with skepticism. He had returned to Lourdes not for prayer, but for his sister, who lay in the nearby hospice. Wasting away, Henry had no patience for holy water or whispered novenas. He'd come to bring her home before she died among strangers. On the opposite side, near the flickering candles, sat Marie Claire, an elderly nun with a spine bent from years of service. Her eyes were soft but searching, as though she could see the storms in other people's hearts. She held a worn rosary, each bead polished by decades of prayer. And then there was Father Lucas, a young priest in plain black, his collar slightly askew to most. He seemed ordinary, but Lucas carried himself with a quiet humility that unsettled the proud and comforted the broken. He rarely spoke more than necessary, but when he did, his words had a way of taking root. The Mass began. Latin prayers rose like incense, slow and solemn. Bishop Beaumont's voice echoed against the marble columns, but even he could feel the restlessness in the air. Rain hammered the roof. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. It happened at the consecration. The bishop lifted the host, his fingers trembling more than usual. And then the church seemed to still. The rain's drumbeat faded. The flicker of the candles froze in place, and before hundreds of eyes, the Eucharist appeared to rise higher, just beyond the bishop's hands, as if lifted by invisible grace. Gasps broke the silence. A woman near the front began to sob. Henry's arms stiffened, his instinct telling him it was a trick of the light. But his soldier's eyes did not lie. The host hovered there, radiant, untouched. Bishop Beaumont felt the weight of the moment pressed into his chest. For a heartbeat, he was no longer in doubt, no longer the administrator juggling budgets and politics. He was a servant, standing barefoot before the burning bush. But miracles are not comfortable things. They demand something. When the host slowly descended back into his hands, the bishop knew this was not for spectacle. It was a call, and calls require answers. Word spread through Lourdes before the Mass had even ended. Pilgrims whispered to one another in the aisles, their hands clutching rosaries, their eyes wide. Some knelt again, unable to rise, as if afraid to leave the space where heaven had brushed so close to earth. Others ran to the basilica doors, shouting to the crowds outside that something had happened, something holy. By evening, the square was filled with people. The rain had not stopped, but no one seemed to care. Old women in wool shawls stood, shoulder to shoulder with teenagers holding cell phones aloft. Reporters pushed through the throng, their cameras glistening with droplets, trying to catch a glimpse of the bishop. Bishop Beaumont, however, had retreated to his private chambers. The miracle, if that's what it truly was, had not filled him with triumph. Instead, it filled him with a gnawing sense of responsibility. Alone, he sat at his desk. The host's image burned into his mind. He could not explain it, and he feared what it might awaken in others and in himself. Henry Valois lingered outside the basilica long after most had gone. He leaned against a wet stone wall, his coat soaked through, replaying the moment in his mind. His instincts told him to dismiss it. Soldiers survive by not believing in things they cannot see twice. But deep down, something stirred, a memory of kneeling beside his mother as a boy, the smell of incense in his nose, her voice whispering prayers he never understood. Miracles don't make the dead live. Henry muttered under his breath, "They don't stop pain." "You sound like a man trying to convince himself," a voice said behind him. Henry turned. It was Father Lucas, his black coat dripping, his hands tucked into his sleeves. He was not smiling, but there was no judgment in his tone, only Quiet observation. Henry bristled. You think that was real? Lucas shrugged lightly. Real enough to make you stay here in the rain. The words hit Henry harder than he expected. He had no reply, so he pulled his coat tighter and stepped away, muttering something about finding his sister. Meanwhile, in the hospice across the river, Sister Marie Claire moved from bed to bed with her slow, deliberate care. She had heard the whispers of the miracle, but her eyes were fixed on her patients, people whose faith had long been tested by suffering. In room 12, a thin young woman lay pale against her pillow. This was Elise, Henry's sister. Marie Claire took her hand, feeling the fragile bones beneath the skin. They say the host rose today, Marie Claire said softly, Elise's lips curved in the faintest smile. Then maybe my brother will believe again. That night, Bishop Beaumont could not sleep. The miracle haunted him, but so did the letter from Rome lying unopened on his desk. He knew it would be instructions, perhaps even rebuke, for how to handle what had happened, and he dreaded it. Somewhere deep in the night, he rose, lit a candle, and walked to the basilica. The air was cool and damp. The host was back in the tabernacle, hidden behind gold doors. He knelt, staring at the flickering flame of the sanctuary lamp. Lord, he whispered, why now, and why me? The silence answered him, not empty, but waiting. The next morning, Bishop Beaumont received a letter from Rome. The crisp, official tone belied the urgency beneath its words. The Vatican demanded a thorough investigation. They warned against fostering superstition, advising restraint and caution. Faith must never be manipulated, the letter read. The bishop folded the paper carefully, his heart heavy with doubt. Was he protecting the church or silencing a message meant to awaken souls? Henry Valois faced a different kind of battle. His sister Elise's condition had worsened overnight. The doctor spoke softly of exhaustion, of a fragile thread holding her life. Henry sat by her bedside, gripping her hand, the memories of their childhood flooding back, the prayers their mother whispered, the small miracles that had once seemed so distant. Why won't you fight, Elise? He asked, voice breaking. Elise opened her eyes weakly, a faint smile touching her lips. Because sometimes fighting means letting go. Father Lucas watched all this unfold with a quiet sorrow. He had spent years serving this community, bearing witness to pain and hope intertwined like vines. The miracle in Lourdes had shaken him too, not because it challenged his faith, but because it exposed his fears. What if faith was more than doctrine? What if it demanded sacrifice beyond words? Determined, Lucas made his way to the village square that afternoon. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the crowd was smaller, but still restless. He climbed onto a low stone wall, cleared his throat, and spoke simply. Faith is not proof. It is trust. Not in miracles, but in mercy that the Eucharist rose. Today, it rose not to dazzle, but to remind us to love, to forgive, to serve. His words rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others frowned. Henry listened intently, feeling a crack in his own armor of skepticism. Later that evening, Lucas visited Elise quietly, kneeling beside her bed. He took her hand and whispered a prayer, not for healing alone, but for courage to face the unknown with humility. In the chapel, Bishop Beaumont prayed deep into the night. Wrestling with his role as shepherd and judge, the miracle was no longer just an event. It had become a mirror reflecting his own doubts and pride. He remembered the words from an old mentor, the church is not a museum, it's a field hospital. Perhaps the miracle was a call to that truth, a call to heal, not condemn. As dawn broke over Lourdes, the rain ceased, and golden light spilled through stained glass, casting colors on the worn stone floor. It was a new day, not free from struggle, but filled with the possibility of grace.